In a primetime address, the president announced his plans to reform the nation's immigration system.
Mass amnesty would be unfair. Mass deportation would be both impossible and contrary to our character. What I'm describing is accountability.
An immigration attorney weighs in on what this means for the scores of undocumented immigrants in Arizona and beyond.
This is a temporary benefit. It's putting on a Band-Aid on the problem. The problem is still there. There are many more millions of people who are unaccounted for, who are living in the shadows. Something has to be done sooner or later.
This is Arizona Week. In a televised primetime speech, President Obama laid out what he calls a common-sense middle ground approach to fixing our nation's immigration system.
And let's be honest, tracking down, rounding up, and deporting millions of people isn't realistic. Anyone who suggests otherwise isn't being straight with you.
A move, he says, has the legal authority to take. It's estimated the announcement affects some 5 million undocumented immigrants. Here's my interview with Patricia Mejia, an immigration attorney.
I just think that it's an opportunity for people from living in fear to being able to thrive, and it's like surviving to thriving. I think that's the transition that the president is offering them, and it's fair. They have earned it just simply because they've lived here, they've worked, they follow the laws. I mean, now they're gonna really be incorporated into society. So I think it's fair. I think it's fair. It's generous. It's definitely generous, and I hope people don't squander this opportunity. It's really a wonderful opportunity for them. So.
And you've already begun to receive phone calls from potential clients who want to know, do they qualify? What does this mean for them?
Well, it's another opportunity for them. It's another form of relief that was previously not available. I think a lot of people are wondering whether they will be covered or not. And I think it's another opportunity. It's the beginning of a dream almost for them, I think.
You've been doing this since the 90s, and you said that you were excited to hear what the president had to say because you've worked with a lot of different cases that you would have liked to help.
Yes, and it's interesting to look back over, trying to go over memory of cases and people, and I think, oh my God, this person would have qualified and they're not here anymore, or, cases in the past. So it's going to be interesting to see if there's any sort of retroactive benefit for people also.
The president talked about parents with children. So what is that age limit on children? Because there may be families out there who have children who are now adults.
Exactly, and that's something that we need clarification on. Typically, the definition of children as contained in the Act is under 21. So that leaves that as an open question. I know that people in debates and have been using the word children and also sons and daughters. Sons and daughters suggests that there's no age limit. So we would need that to be clarified.
You've had clients that are contacting you already wondering what this means for them. What are you telling them right now other than we're waiting for clarification on some of these details?
We're waiting, don't hire anybody yet. There's nothing yet. I mean, normally I guess we would say start gathering documents because I believe you have to have been here for 5 years. So evidence that you have been here for the last 5 years, that maybe that you were here yesterday and today, which is the day of the announcement. In other previous presidential executive actions, he has required that you show physical presence the day of the announcement. So we're telling people to kind of like make purchases, have receipts, have things that show their presence in the United States yesterday and today.
The president also mentioned that to register and be sure you don't have any criminal background in your system at all. So does that mean that people will have to pay some sort of fine in this registration process? Have you gained any additional information?
No, I mean, typically I think for any immigration benefit, you have to go through biometrics and an FBI check. So I think it's going to be part of the process.
There will be some parents who are apprehensive about coming forward, though, even though they may have a clean record and may be prepared to pay for things, but they're still fearful.
Yes, and I think the fact that the students, the DACA deferred action was granted previously and no harm has come to them, I think would be encouraging for the parents. I think those students were very brave to come forward. They also had the same fears, and it turns out that, that program went really well. So I think it's encouraging for the parents should take courage from their children and come forward, I think.
What type of clients do you typically work with? Is it the families with children? Are they people who maybe do have a bit of a criminal background but are hoping to make things right?
I mean, there's a variety of people. Most of them are just hardworking families who want to make it, and I think this is going to be a fantastic opportunity for them to come out of the shadows and be able to live a normal life. I think there are many, many people here in the city who, who wanted to have that opportunity, and it's going to be finally available to them. I mean, most people want to make it right. Most people are just here to work, and they would be so excited just to be able to drive and not live in fear. I think there's a constant fear of just being here, being apprehended and being deported, and people don't live normal lives based on that fear.
What do you say to the critics and the skeptics of this immigration reform plan?
It's not permanent status. The president cannot grant that. It has to be Congress. So it's just a temporary benefit. It's putting on a Band-Aid on the problem. The problem is still there. There are many more millions of people who are unaccounted for, who are living in the shadows. Something has to be done sooner or later. So this is temporary. It will help a lot of people. The president is going to make sure they are not criminals and that they pay their taxes. So they're just, like you said, there are people like you and I, normal people who live in our communities, and it's time that they came out and joined us, living a normal life. We already live together, we already share the roads, we share the schools, we share the restaurants. Why not have them have some of the same rights that we have?
It's unclear what the fallout from the president's remarks will be, but his executive action will affect immigration policy, and he says the overall economy. Here's Judy Gans, an immigration policy expert at the University of Arizona.
One of the biggest issues that's getting in the way of reforming the immigration system that everybody understands is broken is what to do with the undocumented population in the country. There's best estimates about 11 million people, and we're having a political debate about what to do, what the appropriate penalty is for having broken our immigration laws. It's an issue people feel really strongly about. One side of the argument says that the only appropriate penalty for having broken our immigration laws is to be deported. The other end of the spectrum says, look, we hired them, they're here trying to make a better life, let it go. The answer will be somewhere in the middle. So far, every set of penalties that Congress has proposed, the last two attempts at reforming the immigration system, actually included some pretty stiff penalties that were required to be met before people could attain legal status. And those were successfully labeled as amnesty. That word is used by people who really oppose anything short of being deported. And that successfully killed the legislation. If you look at polling, roughly 75% of Americans, I've seen one poll result that said 75% of Americans support legalization with a path to citizenship if there are penalties involved. But if that gets called amnesty, then politically it's an effective way of stopping it. So I think these administrative actions on the part of the president are an attempt to move that issue forward and whittle away at the size of the population that's living in the shadows. Now he's clearly limited in what he can do. He can't change the laws, but he can change how the laws are implemented. What it does going forward is really tricky to understand because it does poison the waters. I mean, that's, the Republicans have made it very clear that that's what this would do, but it's not clear they were going to act on immigration anyway. I think it's interesting that the deferral is 3 years, which takes us into 1 year into the next presidency. And I think everything will depend on who gets elected to the White House next term.
Economically, we're hearing that this will benefit the economy of the U.S.
Yeah.
Do you understand that? Does that make sense?
I think that's correct. I think one of the things that it does is by taking a big group of workers out of the shadows, it makes them less vulnerable to exploitation. And the fact that you have this large workforce in some sectors that are vulnerable to exploitation actually lowers everybody's wages, because legal workers are then competing with workers who can be exploited and work for less. By bringing people out of the shadows, it helps everybody in terms of that downward pressure on wages. And it also it makes people regular participants in the workforce as opposed to working for cash, which means they can avoid taxes or taxes get avoided. So I think in general it does help the economy, but politically it complicates things.
How quickly will we start to see a change in immigration to the U.S. or to these people who are living here, as you say, in the shadows right now?
One of the things that's been driving illegal immigration to the U.S. is this mismatch between the legal system and what the economy has needed. We've had significant growth in jobs that require low-skill young workers, and actually relatively few U.S.-born low-skill young workers. So the economic incentives are trumping our legal system. You know, a legal immigration system creates the context in which migration happens, but when that legal system is out of alignment with what's driving it, then you end up with illegal immigration.
Now for the story of Rosa Robles Loreto, an undocumented immigrant from Mexico who took sanctuary in a Tucson church. The wife and mother has not left the Southside Church for more than 100 days. Fernanda Echavarri has her story.
Yo tengo 100 días aquí, 100 días de lucha. El presidente le bastaría un solo día para tomar una decisión. Entonces es muy triste seguir aquí.
Rosa Robles Loreto was given sanctuary at the Southside Presbyterian Church in August, and she hasn't left the premises. She was seeking protection from Immigration and Customs Enforcement after receiving a deportation order. This is the same church where the sanctuary movement was born in the 1980s, and Central American migrants fleeing civil war were giving refuge. The church had not given sanctuary to anyone until earlier this year.
Quinoa.
Quinoa. You can do the quinoa.
He ayudado en la cocina para la gente que viene a cocinar menudo, que enchiladas, y me invitan a cocinar porque para que se me vaya toda la mañana, a veces se nos va toda la mañana en guisar y se me va a mí, y aparte ya cuando entro al cuarto ya casi llegan mis hijos, ya les hablo, ya se me va, como quien dice, ya la parte del día, entonces es menos duro para uno estar encerrada en un cuarto. Pues ya tengo 100 días sin cocinar en casa, ¿no? Aquí es donde cocino yo para mis hijos, cocino en las tardes y se la lleva mi esposo la comida para el día siguiente, ¿no?
Rosa and her husband have 2 sons in elementary school, and she says she misses going to their baseball games the most. She's been in Tucson for 15 years, and her lack of legal status surfaced during a routine traffic stop a couple years ago. The whole family is in the U.S. illegally. She has no criminal record, and that's one of the reasons why immigration officials have said agents are not actively seeking to deport her. But Rosa's request to remove her deportation order was denied.
Hace más de 3 meses lo anunció que gente que no es prioridad como yo no era elegible para ser deportada. Entonces, personas como yo, que yo no he matado a nadie, que mi único delito es haberme quedado por una oportunidad aquí de trabajo. Soy una persona normal, es una persona que cumplo con las reglas, excepto el haberme quedado aquí, ¿no? Pero de ahí, mis 15 años, es la única vez que me han parado. No he pedido nunca un apoyo al gobierno por lo mismo, porque quiero estar con ellos bien.
Rosa and her lawyer did not expect that she would live in sanctuary for this long. A Mexican man was given sanctuary at the same church in May and received a 1-year stay from immigration officials less than a month later. Rosa says living in sanctuary has not been easy, but dozens of volunteers are taking turns at Southside Presbyterian to make sure that she's never alone.
El día de que cumplí los 100 días es un apoyo grandísimo. Gente vino, pensaba, necesitaban más lugar donde la iglesia, porque se llenó, no tenían parada la gente. Es algo bonito el apoyo, que están conmigo y que piden al presidente, ¿verdad? Que vean estos casos de santuario, gente que estamos nada más pidiendo que cierren nuestros casos exactamente para seguir nuestra vida normal, seguir trabajando. Aquí empecé yo toda mi vida, he limpiado casas con un orgullo, hacer eso, limpiar oficinas, el pensar que yo tengo una carrera y estar limpiando toilet, para mí es un orgullo. ¿Por qué? Porque es algo que yo quiero estar aquí y es algo que tengo que empezar desde abajo. Mi traila no es una mansión, es pequeña, es chiquitolina, pero yo sé que con mi esfuerzo y el esfuerzo de mi esposo logramos tener esa traila. O sea, eso es lo que me tiene fuerte aquí. En México no tenemos nada. Si hace algo el presidente, sí da miedo en no entrar en esas categorías, pero yo me alegro de que la gente que sí es elegible, pues ya va a respirar un poco.
Now for a reporter analysis on the president's announcement, I'm joined by Perla Treviso of the Arizona Daily Star, Carla Gomez Escamilla of Telemundo Tucson, and my colleague here at Arizona Public Media, Fernanda Echavarri. Fernanda, let's start with you in the story of Rosa. Based on what we heard the president say last night, does it appear as though she'll be in the clear now?
Rosa doesn't quite qualify on some of the bigger changes that the president announced last night. The one sort of sliver of hope that she can have is it's actually in a document that the White House put out last night that directs the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security to close the cases of people that they don't consider to be priorities. That's where Rosa would fit in. She doesn't have a criminal record. However, her kids are not American citizens. Therefore, she doesn't qualify for the biggest change that the president announced last night.
All three of you ladies have interviewed her in the past, and Perla, you were mentioning that there's so much that we don't know about what we're about to see with this immigration reform plan. So she may qualify eventually because of her children being students.
Well, it depends. So there's DACA, right? It's a deferred action for childhood arrivals. Before it had an age cap of 31 that is no longer the case. What's unclear, and we were discussing earlier, is whether if there's a minimum age requirement. So her kids are really young right now, and therefore did not qualify for DACA. That program has been extended. It's still not clear whether the minimum age requirement has been lifted. But even if they get DACA, that doesn't really affect Rosa because it's not giving them legal status. They're just telling them you can apply for a work permit and we won't deport you. And now it's for 3 years as opposed to 2. So in the case of Rosa, she is a low priority case. As Fernanda said, the biggest change from the announcement, the biggest change is parents of U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident kids now can apply for that deferred action. Again, it's not legal status. It's simply saying we're not going to deport you. You can apply for a work permit. You can come out of the shadows, as the president said last night.
Fernanda.
And we need to remember also that this is not a new law. So this is an executive action that some of these parents who may receive these temporary permits, the next president comes along and he or she could change that. So that's one of the things that I know in the beginning, all of us reported on deferred action for childhood arrivals. That was keeping some of the young immigrants from applying for that because they were fearful if Mitt Romney won in the election that perhaps that would be revoked. So everything that we talk about as far as the president's announcement last night is temporary.
And Carla, you've gotten to work with her or know Rosa quite a bit. Emotionally, you captured some photos that we saw on social media last night. Tell me about what it was like being there with her as she watched the president make his announcement.
She had no reaction on her face as she was listening to the president. She had a lawyer next to her and she was trying to translate what the president was saying. She had no emotion at all. She stood up in front of the crowd and said that she was happy for everybody, that she knew that she was not going to be a benefit. She said that her kids had the benefit to take an opportunity. And she held really, really strong. The moment that I went over to ask her for an interview and she gave me a hug and she broke down, and it was really difficult for her to accept it. And she says, I realize we are Mexican. I realize we do not fit in, but I am not going to give up. So she still has the hope, but you could clearly see that her heart was broken yesterday.
And then covering for Spanish language media, obviously it's a different scenario for you in presenting a story like this. What are you seeing from the majority of people that your station serves?
They want to hear the human aspect of it. That's what we try to focus. We try to focus, okay, Rosa, she's one of the ones that are not going to benefit. And then we have Francisco. Francisco is the one that's going to benefit. Why? Why not? And then talk to lawyers to kind of clear up what's going on. Don't rush into things. Make sure that you're going to ask the right questions to the right people, that you're not going to be a victim of fraud. And, just take things, calm down, and don't rush. So just to try to be as informative as we can, because our audience is really big on immigration, and a majority of our audience is also either a beneficiary of this announcement or not. So they're very interested. So we try to be as clear as possible. And this Saturday, we'll be having a town hall in our studios, receiving phone calls to direct to lawyers so they can answer, because there's too many things that are going to, in the next couple of weeks, even the whole month of December, that we're going to be not very certain of what's going to happen.
And an immigration attorney that I spoke with earlier has said we may see this sort of unravel in the next 6 months or so. So I think as journalists, we'll continue to see those people come forth with their stories. But Perla, it's fair to say those people will still remain in the shadows, so to speak.
Yeah, I think a good point that Fernanda brought up is when DACA was introduced. I mean, I think nationally the Migration Policy Institute was estimated that I think a little over half had applied. And so I think in Arizona you have a larger number, but you still have, a lot of uncertainty. So it is, how do you handle that? Because it was a major announcement, but I think everyone agreed that comprehensive immigration reform is still needed. So I think this is going to be a very uncertain moment, not only, and also for journalists to try to figure out, okay, what is and what isn't. There's a lot of rhetoric around immigration, even before this announcement. So it's going to be our job to try to tell and educate our people about what he actually said, what that means, and be very clear about what it doesn't mean.
If I can say something, when saying we don't know what's going to happen, Francisco immediately, oh, he's a beneficiary, he has 5 children, the 5 of them are U.S. citizens, he fits into this. He still doesn't know what he's going to do. If he's going to go ahead and get out of the sanctuary and accept this, or try to continue fighting his case to close. Because if he fights for his case to close, and he goes through the immigration courts like that, he might have a better chance to be able to stay afterwards, because this is such a temporary thing. So at this point, he still doesn't know what he's going to do, even though he's clearly one of the beneficiaries of this announcement.
And we should note that Francisco is in sanctuary at another church in Tucson. And Fernanda, you've covered his case a little bit.
A little bit as well, yes. And like Carla said, even the 2 sanctuary cases that could have been grouped into, we have 2 people in southern Arizona who are living in sanctuary. Their cases are so different, and it's the little things that make a difference, is where were these children born, and like Carla said, what choice is he going to make? Does he want to continue his case, fighting his case the way Rosa will continue to fight her case? As we mentioned in the piece, she's been in sanctuary for over 100 days now, and she's going to continue to stay at the church.
In a case like Francisco, though, what does the timeline look like? I mean, there are reports that he could actually be home in time for the holidays, per se. Fernanda, have you heard anything on that?
I spoke with one of the spokespeople for the sanctuary movement, and I asked her just a little bit ago if he was going to leave. And she said that she doesn't see why the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Office in Phoenix wouldn't receive his paperwork if he wanted to apply through the new changes that Obama has made, and that they were going to try to get everything done before Thanksgiving. Now, I'm not sure that the White House and that federal courts and immigration offices all over the country already have this sort of paperwork in place to be able to have people apply right away. So that's also one of the things that we'll see in the coming days or weeks, is how will people apply, and are immigration courts and immigration officers all over the country ready for this?
Carla, how do you foresee families who do not qualify under here? What is life like for them now?
I think it's just, we're going to continue fighting, and we're going to continue, because I talked to another lady yesterday who was at the sanctuary at the church where we all heard the announcement, and the first thing she came up to me and asked me, are the parents for the Dreamers coming in? And I said, I don't think so. I don't think just yet. And she's like, okay, well then I'm going to have to continue being in the shadows as I've been. It's like, we wanted this, kind of in the mindset that we wanted this opportunity to get out and be able to live a normal life, but if they can't, they can't, and they're just going to continue. It's not like they have other plans to leave or anything else like that.
And Perla, we've seen stories like this where people live very cautiously to avoid, to stay under the radar.
Yes, I mean, people, especially after you hear stories of people being stopped by a local police officer, for example, and then referred to Border Patrol, people become more mindful of when they drive, where they drive. I've heard stories where the parents tell the kids, if I don't come back, do this or that. They have things in place. The consulates encourage people to make sure their kids have passports from those countries that they have. They have a notarized document giving legal custody to their relative or their friend. So you do see this kind of a plan in case something happens. I mean, not all of the families. I was in Tennessee when there was a big immigration raid at a chicken processing plant, and it caught a lot of parents off guard, and they were scrambling to get passports for their kids, have those documents notarized, and it was a good reminder, I think, for the community that you just don't know when you leave your home. Although, from what the new memo that was also issued, the administration is emphasizing again that their priority is recent border crossers, meaning people who just, were caught here in the desert at the ports of entry, people with felonies or serious criminal histories, people with that they say poses a danger to national security. So in theory, parents who do not have a criminal record, have been here a long time, and in theory they should not be considered a priority.
Fernanda.
I think it is worth remembering that we're in Arizona, so things are a little bit different. For example, when we're talking about Rosa's case, Immigration and Customs Enforcement has already said she's not a priority. And you just mentioned that the memo from the president is underlining that. However, we have a law in place in the state that if Rosa were to leave and she were to have a broken taillight or jaywalk or whatever it may be, our local police officers do have the authority to ask her about her immigration status. So that's I think, one of the reasons why here in the state some of these things mean, especially the priority issue, it means something a little bit differently for Arizona.
Carla, would you agree that's the perception of some of, for example, your viewers?
Definitely. They live under this stress because they don't know what's going to happen next. If they go from work, what's going to happen if I go and I come? Like Norland, one of the guys from the Centro de Trabajadores, the worker center, he went to the hospital to receive his baby. On the way back, he was stopped by police. So that has provoked also a lot of anxiety and depression in people who imagine living under the shadow of immigration and then having a health problem like that. And it's just, they're so scared. And that's going to continue to be like that because, as Fernanda is saying, we still have SB 1070 active in Arizona.
A lot of unknowns remain. Okay, ladies, thank you for your analysis and thank you for joining us. Arizona Week will not broadcast next week because of the Thanksgiving holiday. Our program returns, though, on December 5th. For all of us at Arizona Public Media, I'm Lorraine Rivera.